Good afternoon, everyone. I hope this finds you well. Welcome to HRPP's Research Matters. I'm Erica Salzik, the Department Administrator for UT Southwestern's Human Research Protection Program, and I will be one of the moderators for today's session. Let's go over our housekeeping. So first, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them in the Q&A. One of the moderators will respond to you during the session, or we will address it at the end of the presentation. This session is recorded and will be available immediately after the conclusion of the live session by clicking on the Microsoft Teams Live link. And we will also send out the slides and handouts via the listserv. You'll also be able to access upcoming Research Matters meeting links, slides, handouts, and all previous recordings on HRPP's Research Matters website, which you can find under the Training and Resources page. We do provide a certificate of attendance for those who have logged in using a valid email address. If you do not receive one via email but should have, please send an email to hrpp@utsouthwestern.edu to request a certificate. And lastly, we want to hear from you. We are interested to know what topics you would like us to cover during these sessions, how did our speakers do, and how our office is doing. So please take a few minutes to complete the survey to provide your feedback. You may access the survey using your phone via the QR code on the screen or selecting the link on your computer, which I'll drop the link in the chat in just a few minutes. Okay, let's go to our agenda. So here's our agenda for today. So today we have a couple of office updates. Manali Thakur will provide an update for the Quality Assurance and Monitoring Office, and Mayed Bird will provide an update for the IRB office. Then we'll jump into our feature presentation on obtaining assent from minors, which will be presented by Satish Birla. And we will conclude with an open Q&A session. So Manali, take it away.
Thank you, Erica. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce our newest team member, Daryl Campbell-Pierre. Daryl joins our Quality Assurance and Monitoring Program as a Regulatory Monitoring Analyst. He comes in with 5 years of research experience, including clinical trials monitoring at a CRO and his academic research as a graduate research scientist. Please join me in welcoming Daryl to HRPP, and we're thrilled to have him come on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Manali. And now I'll turn it over to Mayed.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick update, or actually just one update from the IRB. So studies or that want to rely on the Advara IRB, there's been a change in the consent form process. So to reduce the turnaround times for Advara, and in partnership with UT Southwestern, they've discontinued the use of their current local context language effective December 1, 2023. Instead, what research personnel have to do they will actually have to insert the language into the local context in the informed consent documents prior to submitting them to Advara. If you have any questions related to this new process, you may contact sirb@utsouthwestern.edu with any questions. I'll turn things over to Satish.
Thank you, everyone. Let me share the slides. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will discuss obtaining assent from minors. I am Satish Birla, working as a Senior Regulatory Analyst with UT Southwestern IRB. So for this presentation, I'll be discussing some definitions, requirements for assent process, and a process of obtaining assent, documenting assent, and assent waivers if applicable, and some special scenarios and considerations. So before we move in with obtaining assent in research, let's see some definitions that may be applicable in this presentation. So who is minor and what is the minor? What are they? Minors are who have not attained the legal age for consent in research under the jurisdiction of law. In Texas, a minor is less than 18 years of old. So what is the next definition? Emancipated minor. A minor who wishes to have the legal capacity of an adult can ask a Texas court for the removal of disabilities of minority. So a minor who wishes to participate like a legal consenting process in for treatment, that's what they call it as emancipated minor. And the next one is assent, a child's affirmative agreement to participate in research. So the child is giving the consent for participation in research. And the permission means the agreement of parents or guardian to the participation of their child in research. And who is parent? A child's biological or adoptive parent. And the next one is guardian, an individual who is authorized under applicable state or local law to consent on behalf of a child to general medical care. So now we have seen the definitions. The next question, is child assent always required when research involves children? So let's see if someone wants to put any Q&A answer for this. I'll just wait for 1 minute if someone wants to answer. I hope someone is listening to this. So, no, IRB is responsible for deciding whether child assent is required in proposed research activities or not. So it's not always required to undergo assent process. So what are the requirements? What are the considerations for assent? So some of the IRB considerations of assent based on the regulations. It is required when child can provide assent under 45 CFR 408A, and it may not require if research provides prospect of direct benefit to health or well-being of child and only available in the research context under 45 CFR 46408A. Or it may be waived in accordance with the regulations under 45 CFR 46116. So we'll go in much detail with all these regulations in the future presentation. So what does the UT Southwestern IRB consider based on the age range and whether the assent is required or parental permission is required or not? So if it is birth to age 6, the assent is not required. But the parental permission and the guardian permission is definitely required because the capability is so limited for the assent that they cannot reasonably be consulted. And if the age range is 7 to 10, the assent is required, may be required. Parental permission or guardian permission is required. Children may be capable depending on the maturity and psychological state. So verbal assent or written assent may be required, but must not be waived by the IRB if the child is unable to provide assent. And under the ages 11 to 17, assent is required. Parental permission is required, and children are expected to be capable of providing assent. Written assent is usually required unless it is waived by the IRB. So we'll go under the subpart D, parental and guardian signature requirements regulations. So if the determination of the study is minimal risk under the regulations 45 CFR 46404, or if it is a FDA regulated study 21 CFR 5054, the adequate provisions are made for soliciting the assent of children and parental or the legally authorized representative consent should be under the regulation 45 CFR 46408 or 21 CFR 5055. So at that moment, only one parent signature is sufficient. So if if the study is determined to be greater than minimal risk with the prospect of direct benefit to the participant under the regulations 45 CFR 46405, or if it is a FDA regulated study 21 CFR 5055, the risk benefit is justified. So the adequate provisions are made for obtaining the assent of the children and parental under the legally authorized consent. Only one parent signature is sufficient in that situation. So now let's discuss where the greater than minimal risk study with no prospect of direct benefit, but it's likely to yield generalizable knowledge. So it is under regulation 45 CFR 46406, or if it is FDA regulated study 21 CFR 5056. The risk is increased over only minimal risk. The risk of the intervention or procedure is reasonably commensurate with those inherent in actual or expected medical, dental, or psychological, or any kind of social behavioral situations. And if the generalizable knowledge is likely from the research, which is the importance for the understanding and of the any condition or the any disorder, at that time, both parents of the child is necessary unless one is deceased, unknown, incompetent, and not reasonably available. Only one parent has legal responsibility for the care or the custody of the minor. So in those situations, we need to take two parent signature, and if one is unavailable, so we need to consider those scenarios as well. So we'll go into deeper scenarios with these kind of unknown, deceased, incompetent, or not reasonably available in the later part of the presentation. So the last final determination regulation is research that the IRB believes which does not meet the conditions of 45 CFR for 46404 or 405 or 406, but finds the research presents a reasonable opportunity to further the understanding, prevention, or alleviation of a serious problem affecting the health or welfare of the children under the regulation 45 CFR 46407B. So the research may proceed only if the HHS Human Health and Human Services Secretary, after a panel of consultation with the experts and following an opportunity to public review and comment, determines that the research in fact satisfies the condition of the regulations under 45 CFR 46404, 405, or 406 are the following to understand the prevention or alleviation of a serious problem affecting the health and welfare of the child. The research will be conducted in accordance with the sound ethical principles, and some of the adequate provisions are made for obtaining the permission from the child or from the parents or guardians, which are set forth in the regulation for 45 CFR 46408. If it is FDA regulated, then the regulatory requirements under 21 CFR 5054 must also be met. So in that scenario, the signature requirements are based on the regulations which are set forth under 45 CFR 46408. So when do we consider the assent, and what are the things that we need to be doing for IRB consideration? So Institutional Review Board considers the age, maturity, and psychological state of the children involved for the proposed nature of the research when reviewing the assent process for conveying better information to the participants. And for children whose age and maturity level limits their ability to fully comprehend the nature of the research activity, but who are still capable of being consulted about participation in research, it may be appropriate to focus on conveying the accurate picture of what the actual experience of participation in research is likely to be. Like, for example, like how long the participation will take, or how was the experience will be if they participate in research, and are there any risks or pain or any discomfort when participating in research. Those are the things needs to be considered for this kind of scenario. And the next one is IRB has the discretion to assess the child's capacity to assent for all the children to be involved in a proposed research activity or on an individual basis. So based on the nature of the proposed activities, so the IRB needs to make a decision whether the child is capacitated to assent or not. And for research activities involving adolescents whose capacity to understand resembles that of adults, the assent procedure should likewise include information similar to what you would provide for an informed consent for adults or for parental permission. And the next one is the assent procedure should reflect a reasonable effort to enable the child to understand to the degree they are capable what their participation in research would involve. So these are the things the IRB will consider for assent process. So the next one is how to obtain the assent. So when only one parent accompanies the child to a visit, they should be asked to provide the contact information of the other parent, and the investigator or the study team should contact the other parent to discuss the study and to arrange to obtain consent. If the IRB determines 2 parent signature is required, and the child may not be enrolled until the study has obtained consent from both parents and assent as applicable, it is important for the investigator to document all attempts to contact the absent parent along with the basis for any determination that they are reasonably unavailable. So if the assent is determined appropriate, the investigator must obtain assent from minors deemed capable of understanding the nature and the consequence of participation in the study, regardless of the age. So the child should be given an explanation at a level appropriate to the child's age, maturity, and psychological condition of the procedures to be used, their meaning to the child in terms of discomfort and in any inconvenience, and the general purpose of the research should be provided to the child. How to document the assent. For the documentation, you need to obtain permission by parents or guardians shall be documented in accordance with or to the extent requirements under the regulation 45 CFR 46 117 of subpart A of 45 CFR part 46. And essentially, parental permission should be documented in a manner like that used to document informed consent. IRB may find that waiver of documentation of informed consent is appropriate under the regulations at 45 CFR 46 117. Or assent can be documented in a manner like that used to document adult consent, like medical records, EPIC, REDCap, etc. You can use any platform to document the assent process. How should child assent for research participation be documented? If the assent is determined appropriate, documentation of assent is required. Generally, assent of the child is documented by having the child sign the consent form in the designated signature section. And we will show in the later part of the discussion. If the child is enrolled on a study and turns 10 while actively participating in a study, the written assent must not be documented. However, the study team should continue the consent conversation with the child and the parent or guardian throughout the study. So the documentation is always the same, that you can obtain the child assent and document in the medical records. So for a minimal risk study, so we only ask for single parent or guardian, and here is the section where you can get the assent from the child. And when it comes to the 2 parent signature section and more than minimal risk studies, you can obtain the signature of the participant, like giving the assent from the child. Here is the section. You can use that as a documentation purpose. And the next one is assent waivers. How are we going to get the assent waivers from the IRB? So the child assent is required except in the following 3 circumstances described under the regulation 45 CFR 46 408A, and those are the capability of some or all of the children are limited such that they cannot be reasonably consulted. And the next one is the intervention or the procedure involved in the research holds out the prospect of direct benefit to the health or well-being of the child and is available only in the context of the research. That means the child gets benefit out of this participation in research. So that's when we can the IRB can weigh the assent signatures, or the research meets any of the following conditions for the waiver or alteration of informed consent in research involving adults as specified in the regulations at either 45 CFR 46116C or 45 CFR 46116D. And what are those requirements? The research involves no more than minimal risk to the participants, or the waiver will not adversely affect the rights and welfare of the participants, or the research could not practically be carried out if assent was required. And if the research involves using identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens, the research could not practically be carried out without getting that identifiable information from the participants or from the child. When appropriate pertinent information is provided after participation of the child or to the parents or the child. So now we'll see what are the special circumstances or considerations that IRB can review and provide the appropriate documentation of assent. So do parental permission and child assent for research involving children have to occur at the same time or in any order? So as per Health and Human Services regulations do not specify the order. So they don't specify the order, but who has the power? IRB have the discretion to determine the appropriate order. And at UT Southwestern, the appropriate order is determined based on type of research and the context in which research will be conducted. So if it is more than minimal risk research, parental or guardian permission before seeking child assent, unless IRB waives the permission of parental or guardian permission. If it is a minimal risk research, if applicable, child assent prior to seek parental or guardian permission can be waived based on IRB's discretion. So let's think, for example, a school-based study of minimal risk study, and where they are investigating children's response to music, could be posed to children in the school setting. So children could be asked if they wanted to participate or not, and they sent home with a request from parental or guardian permission. So in this case, yes, you can ask the waiver of obtaining parental or guardian permission from the IRB. All they're doing is listening to the music, and it qualifies for the minimal risk procedure. And the IRB may consider and provide the assent waiver, the parental permission waiver for this type of studies. So what happens when there is a disagreement between a child and parents about research participation? If the research study where the IRB determines the child assent needs to be sought and documented, and when that time the child doesn't want to participate in that research, but parents or guardians provide granted permission, so what do you do at that time? So the child's decision prevails at this scenario. However, there is also a caveat to this. If the procedures involved in the research holds out the prospect of direct benefit to child's health and well-being and is only available in the context of research, means that's the only thing that when participating in research will benefit to the child, then the research team can request IRB to waive the assent requirements for consideration as per the regulations under 45 CFR 46408A. So you have to, as a PI or the investigator, has to decide whether it is giving any prospect of direct benefit for the child if the participation in this research involves. The next scenario, if by law a child can consent to treatment without parental permission, can they also consent to participate in research related to that treatment? So if research on a specific treatment involves only treatments or procedures for which minors can give consent outside the research context under applicable state and local laws, for example, like research on sexually transmitted disease or pregnancy, such individuals would not meet the definition of children, and they can be considered as adults as defined under the regulations 45 CFR 46402A. And instead of calling them adults, we call them as emancipated minors. And we have seen the definition of emancipated minor, where they can consent for their treatment. Thus, additional protections of children, subpart D, would not apply to this research, and parental permission is not a consideration for these minors. Under these conditions, minors may provide their own informed consent. So what happens if a child reaches the legal age of consent while enrolled in the study? So as per the regulations, informed consent is always an ongoing process throughout the duration of the research participation or research participant. When a child was enrolled in research with parental or guardian permission and subsequently child reached the legal age of 18, as per the Texas state law, in an ongoing interaction or intervention in the research, then under the requirements of 45 CFR Part 46, 408, regulations, child's participation is no longer regulated under parental or guardian permission and subject assent. So similarly, if research does not involve ongoing interaction or intervention with the subjects, but the research team wants to collect the identifiable data or biospecimens from the participant, then it would be important to obtain legally effective informed consent of the now adult subjects. So when they turn 18, you just have to consent one more time and get the permission from the subject. However, under both circumstances, IRB may consider, if appropriate, a waiver under 45 CFR 46(116) of the requirements for obtaining informed consent for the subjects to continue their participation in the research. So it always comes to the IRB whether we can waive the requirements of obtaining assent or not, or informed consent for these subjects. The next scenario, what happens when a parent says no to discussing assent with a child? So we have a study. Let's discuss. We have a study that parent affirmatively consents to participation, but parent refuses research team opportunity to speak with the child. So how do you tackle this scenario? Under 45 CFR 46405 regulations, when one of the criteria is adequate provisions are made for soliciting the assent of the children and permission of their parents or guardians as set forth under the regulations 408, it states the capability of some or all of the children is so limited that they cannot reasonably be consulted, or that the intervention or procedure involved in the research holds out the prospect of direct benefit that is important to the health or well-being of the children, and is only available only in the context of research, the assent of the children is not a necessary condition for proceeding with this research. So if a parent says not to discuss and it holds out the prospect of direct benefit to the child, then yes, we can apply that assent is not required, not a necessary condition for proceeding with the research. Now we'll see the special circumstances. One, we have got some questions from the research community, like I've been documenting those. These are some of them. If parents are separated and only one parent retains custody of the child, does the research team still need the permission of the other parent? You may proceed with single parent who has legal custody of the child, legal custody for the child, and can be documented during consent or assent process under subpart D regulations. Let's think there's a scenario the parent asks not to contact the other parent for some reasons. As an example of other parent is not involved in the child's life. And how do you proceed in this scenario? So document the reason during consent or assent process due to not reasonably available. And so obtain only single parent signature. And be very cautious with this approach to ensure that you do not violate any court orders. And the next scenario is how to document if one of parent is unknown. There is no idea or no way to contact the other parent for child's research. And always use research note or note to file to explain about the unknown situation for the other parent as to unable to get the signature for child's research. So in that scenario, only one single parent is applicable. Single parent signature is applicable. So we get a lot of these questions like how many attempts can be made to reach the other parent to obtain signatures. So there is no guidance or regulations around this, but the best practice is to try 3 times and document every time about what happened, why you're not able to reach out to the second parent. And when both parents are not present at the initial contact with the research team, can the research team consent one parent and child who can participate at that time and later contact the other parent? Yes, this is appropriate if the research procedures are not performed before obtaining both signatures and documented properly about the consent process. So that means you cannot say that the patient has been enrolled until you receive 2 parent signatures as obtained in this scenario. So you can only say enrolled when you have 2 parent signatures for this research, for this kind of research. So in Texas, a minor may consent to medical, dental, psychological, and surgical treatment for him or herself, and hence may also consent to research for some special circumstances or treatment if any of the following is met by the minor. So the minor is on active duty with the armed services of the United States of America, or she is 16 years of age or older and residing separate and apart from his or her parents, managing conservator or guardian with or without consent and regardless of the duration, and managing his or her own financial affairs regardless of the source of the income, and is also seeking the diagnosis and treatment of infectious, contagious, or communicable diseases that is required under by state law, Texas Department of Health, including all diseases with the scope under Section 81.041 Health and Safety Code, or is unmarried, pregnant, and consent to hospital, medical, and surgical treatment other than abortion related to the pregnancy, and is seeking an examination and treatment for drug or chemical addiction, drug or chemical dependency, or any other conditions directly related to drug or chemical use, and is serving a term of confinement in a facility of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So that's when a minor can be considered as an adult or can be given the informed consent for their participation in research. So what is the take-home message for all the research community? Assent may be required, and it is always an ongoing process. And the process of obtaining oral or written assent for children and minors is similar to that of obtaining consent for adults. So the assent and the consent is also almost similar way. And assent and or parental permission should always be documented, although the IRB may modify the standards based on age, maturity, developmental status, and other considerations that may determine the appropriateness of a given approach. The IRB may waive the assent for children in cases where the IRB deems or determines that the child or children are incapable of providing assent. And we have seen certain special provisions and circumstances needs to be considered for assent process. Any questions?
Okay, so yes, that does conclude Satish's presentation, and we have time for a open Q&A session. So I'm going to pause to give you some time to type up your question if you have one. And so, yeah, so while we wait for you to get your question typed up, if you had one, I just want to remind you of the survey. If you could just spend a few minutes to complete the questions, we will use the information to improve the content of these sessions and how we present them. And we'll also be able to see what areas we need to work on in the office and what areas we are excelling in. So you may use the link or the QR code on your screen. I'm just gonna wait just a few more seconds to see if there are any questions out there. Okay, well, I don't see any questions coming through. But if you do happen to think of one, you are always welcome to attend one of our open office hours, which are held on most Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And with all of that being said, I'm going to conclude. So I want to thank our presenter, Satish. Thank you. Thank you all for attending today's session. The next Research Matters session is scheduled for December 19th. Have a great rest of your week, guys.
Thank you all.